They looked at the quiet woman in the gray cardigan and assumed she didn't belong in the executive lounge. Less than 30 minutes later, every departure screen inside Boston International Airport would go black. Security gates would freeze mid-scan, and the same people who ignored her would realize they had just humiliated the only person who could stop the collapse. The executive lounge overlooking Terminal C shimmered beneath warm amber lighting and floor-to-ceiling glass windows as rain streaked softly across the runway outside. Wealth moved differently in places like this. Expensive watches flashed beneath designer suit sleeves. Champagne glasses clinked softly beside leather chairs worth more than most monthly mortgages. Travelers spoke in polished whispers about mergers, hedge funds, and meetings in Manhattan, while airport staff floated carefully between tables like performers in a carefully rehearsed play. And in the middle of all of it sat Evelyn Carter, almost invisible. She occupied a single chair near the far window with a faded navy tote bag resting beside her feet and an old silver laptop balanced on her knees. Her gray cardigan looked slightly worn at the sleeves. Her white sneakers carried faint rain marks near the soles. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, which was precisely why nobody gave her any. A waiter carrying a tray of sparkling water passed directly by her without stopping. Moments later, he offered the same tray to a man wearing a Rolex and tailored charcoal suit seated 2 chairs away. Evelyn didn't react. She simply continued typing calmly, blue eyes reflecting the shifting glow of departure screens overhead. Across the lounge, Lauren Whitmore noticed her immediately. Lauren managed the executive lounge with the kind of precision that bordered on obsession. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a flawless twist, and her navy blazer sat perfectly against her posture like armor designed for authority. At 36, she had built her career on maintaining exclusivity. In her world, appearances mattered. Appearances were everything. And the woman near the window did not fit the image she wanted associated with her. Lounge. Lauren approached the reception desk where a younger employee quietly scanned boarding passes. Who checked her in? Lauren asked under her breath while subtly nodding toward Evelyn. The employee glanced nervously toward the window. I think she entered during the shift change. Her pass cleared automatically. Lauren's lips tightened slightly. Automatically doesn't mean correctly. Nearby, a businessman laughed loudly into his phone while another traveler adjusted the cufflinks on his white dress shirt. No one noticed the tension building near reception. No one noticed Evelyn glance briefly toward a flickering departure monitor near gate 42. The screen blinked once. Then again. Her fingers paused above the keyboard for barely a second before continuing to type. At that exact moment, a little girl dragging a pink backpack stumbled near the lounge entrance, scattering boarding papers across the marble floor. Several passengers looked away awkwardly. One woman sighed in irritation. Evelyn quietly stood, walked over, and knelt beside the child without saying a word. Here you go, she said gently, gathering the papers into neat order before handing them back with a soft smile. The little girl smiled nervously. Thank you. Evelyn nodded once and returned to her seat. But Lauren had already made up her mind. From across the room, she watched the quiet woman settle back near the window, and something about the simplicity of her presence irritated her even more. In Lauren's eyes, the executive lounge represented status, image, and power. And the woman in the gray cardigan looked like none of those things. What Lauren didn't know was that somewhere beneath the airport, hidden behind layers of encrypted infrastructure and miles of server wiring, the system Evelyn Carter helped build was beginning to fail. Lauren Whitmore walked across the lounge floor with the controlled confidence of someone who believed every person in the room existed within categories she alone understood. Important people, unimportant people, those who belonged and those who did not. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished marble as conversations softened around her presence. Staff members straightened immediately when they saw her approaching. Near the espresso bar, 2 junior associates lowered their voices and pretended not to watch. Lauren stopped beside Evelyn's chair without greeting her. For a moment, she simply looked down at the woman near the window, as if waiting for her to notice the imbalance between them. Evelyn continued typing calmly on her laptop. The glow from the departure boards reflected faintly across her glasses, while another distant flash flickered briefly near gate 42 on the far side of the terminal. Lauren finally spoke. Ma'am, I need to see your lounge credentials. Her voice carried the polished sharpness of corporate hospitality, polite enough on the surface to avoid complaint, cold enough underneath to make the humiliation unmistakable. Evelyn looked up slowly. Of course. She reached into her tote bag and handed over a digital boarding pass displayed on her phone. Lauren scanned it once, then again. Her expression tightened. Business class? She asked, unable to hide the skepticism in her voice. That is correct, Evelyn replied quietly. A nearby passenger lowered his newspaper slightly to listen. Another man seated beside the fireplace removed one AirPod and glanced over with open curiosity. Lauren folded her arms. This lounge is reserved for premium travelers. We have had issues recently with unauthorized access during shift changes. Evelyn nodded once. I understand. The simplicity of the response somehow irritated Lauren more. She had expected defensiveness, embarrassment, apologies. Instead, the woman remained calm, almost detached, as if the entire interaction meant very little to her. Lauren looked toward the reception desk. Can somebody verify this manually? She asked loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. A younger employee hurried over nervously with a tablet. While he checked the records, the businessman in the charcoal suit smirked into his coffee cup. Maybe economy seating got an upgrade today, he muttered quietly to the man beside him. Soft laughter followed. Evelyn heard it. So did Lauren. But neither acknowledged it directly. Beyond the glass windows outside, lightning flashed. Somewhere over the runway, a low rumble echoed faintly through the terminal. The departure monitor near gate 42 flickered harder this time before stabilizing again. Evelyn's eyes moved toward it instinctively. You may want to have someone check your internal network bridge, she said calmly. Lauren blinked once. Excuse me. Your system latency is increasing, Evelyn replied, returning her gaze to the laptop screen. It is probably originating from Terminal B. The younger employee glanced at Evelyn with confusion. Lauren let out a short, restrained laugh. Thank you for the technical advice, she said with obvious condescension. But I think airport operations can manage themselves. Several nearby travelers smiled faintly at the remark. One woman whispered something to her husband and shook her head dismissively. Evelyn simply nodded again. Then every light above the espresso bar flickered at once. The lounge fell briefly dim before emergency backup lighting activated overhead. A few passengers looked up in confusion. Somewhere deeper in the terminal, an alarm beeped once, then stopped. The younger employee stared down at his tablet. That is strange, he whispered. The device screen had frozen completely. Lauren's jaw tightened instantly. Restart it, she snapped quietly. But before the employee could respond, every departure screen visible through the giant glass windows suddenly blinked black all at the same time. And for the first time that morning, the executive lounge went completely silent. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. The massive departure boards beyond the glass walls remained dark, stretching across the terminal like giant black mirrors reflecting confused faces back at themselves. Then the silence broke all at once. A sharp electronic tone echoed overhead. Another followed. Passengers throughout the terminal began stopping mid-step as gate information disappeared completely from every screen in sight. Inside the lounge, conversations erupted instantly. What just happened? One traveler muttered while pulling out his phone. My boarding pass disappeared, another woman whispered, staring down at her airline app in disbelief. Near the reception desk, the younger employee tapped frantically against the frozen tablet screen, while Lauren Whitmore struggled to keep her expression composed. Restart the system, she ordered sharply. I already tried, the employee replied, panic creeping into his voice. Nothing is responding. Another staff member rushed in from the hallway leading toward the terminal gates. Lauren, the scanners at security checkpoint 3 just went offline. What? Passengers cannot board. None of the biometric systems are syncing. Across the lounge, nervous murmurs spread like wine through dry leaves. Phones lit up everywhere. Travelers refreshed airline apps repeatedly only to watch loading symbols spin endlessly across their screens. Somewhere deeper in the terminal, a child began crying. Evelyn Carter remained seated near the window, calm and still beneath the growing tension around her. Her eyes tracked the reflection of flashing emergency lights far below on the tarmac, while her fingers moved quietly across the keyboard of her aging silver laptop. The businessman in the charcoal suit noticed her first. While everyone else panicked, the woman in the gray cardigan looked strangely focused. Not frightened, not confused. Focused. He frowned slightly. How is she so calm? He muttered under his breath. Lauren overheard him and turned immediately toward Evelyn again. Something about the woman's composure suddenly irritated her even more than before. Ma'am, Lauren said firmly while stepping closer. I am going to need you to close that laptop. Evelyn looked up slowly. Why? Airport systems are experiencing technical difficulties. I noticed. Lauren folded her arms tighter. For security reasons, I cannot allow unauthorized devices operating during a network interruption. Several nearby passengers glanced toward Evelyn suspiciously now. One older man lowered his glasses and stared openly. Another traveler slowly moved his carry-on farther away from her chair. The atmosphere shifted with frightening speed. Moments ago, she had simply looked out of place. Now people were beginning to wonder if she was connected somehow. Evelyn closed the laptop halfway, but did not seem offended. Your routing infrastructure is collapsing, she said quietly. The failure started 12 minutes ago. Lauren's expression hardened immediately. How would you know that? Because the backup synchronization between Terminal B and Terminal C is no longer communicating properly. The younger employee near the desk froze. Lauren, he whispered nervously. That is exactly what operations just reported. Silence hit again. Small, brief, heavy. Lauren's eyes narrowed toward Evelyn with growing suspicion. Who are you? Before Evelyn could answer, every light inside the lounge flickered violently again. This time several went completely dark. Emergency backup strips along the floor activated in dim amber lines across the marble. Outside the lounge windows, the runway lights near taxiway 7 suddenly shut off in sections, plunging part of the airfield into darkness beneath the rain. Gasps spread across the terminal. Somewhere nearby, security alarms began sounding continuously. Then came the announcement overhead, distorted slightly through static. Attention passengers. Due to an unexpected systems outage, all departing flights are temporarily grounded until further notice. The room went completely still, and for the first time since approaching the quiet woman near the window, Lauren Whitmore felt something cold settle into the pit of her stomach. Rain hammered harder against the massive terminal windows as the airport descended into controlled chaos. Across the darkened concourse below the executive lounge, hundreds of stranded passengers crowded around dead departure screens, while airline employees struggled to answer questions they did not understand themselves. Boarding gates remained frozen shut. Escalators stopped abruptly between floors. Electronic kiosks flashed error messages before going black entirely. The entire airport suddenly felt less like a transportation hub and more like a drifting machine, slowly losing power. Inside the lounge, panic spread in quieter, more restrained ways. Wealthy travelers refreshed stock apps nervously. One executive barked into his phone about missing a merger meeting in Chicago. Another woman demanded answers from a trembling employee near the espresso bar. But beneath the irritation and confusion, something else had begun to spread through the room. Fear. Lauren Whitmore could feel it. And worst of all, she could feel herself losing control of the room with it. Call airport operations again, she ordered sharply. I already did. The younger employee replied while gripping the frozen tablet tightly. Nobody is answering. Lauren turned immediately toward Evelyn Carter. The quiet woman remained seated near the window beneath the soft amber emergency lights, one hand resting calmly against her half-closed laptop. Her expression had not changed once since the outage began. No panic, no frustration, only concentration. Lauren stepped closer again, this time no longer pretending politeness. I need to know exactly who you are. Several nearby passengers turned toward Evelyn instantly. The businessman in the charcoal suit leaned forward slightly in his chair. Another traveler slowly removed his reading glasses, watching carefully now. Evelyn looked up at Lauren with steady blue eyes. Right now, she said quietly, you need to isolate Terminal B from the primary aviation grid before the synchronization loop spreads. Lauren stared at her in disbelief. What does that even mean? It means your backup systems are feeding corrupted traffic back into the central network. Evelyn's calm voice somehow made the situation feel even more serious. If they do not sever the bridge manually, the entire airport routing system will collapse completely within minutes. A nervous laugh escaped one of the passengers nearby. And how exactly would you know that? He asked sarcastically. Evelyn did not even look toward him. Because the failure pattern is recursive, she replied simply. It is following the exact cascade model I warned them about 3 years ago. Silence fell again. Smaller this time. Stranger. Lauren folded her arms tightly, refusing to let uncertainty show on her face. You keep speaking as though you work for airport systems. Evelyn hesitated for the first time, only briefly. Then she looked back toward the dark runway outside. I used to. Before Lauren could respond, a loud burst of static crackled through the overhead speakers. The emergency announcement system activated again, but this time the automated voice sounded fragmented and unstable. Attention passengers. Security verification systems are currently unavailable. Please remain inside designated terminal areas until further notice. The lights flickered violently again. Somewhere below the lounge, a wave of alarmed shouting suddenly echoed across the concourse floor. Several passengers rushed toward the windows overlooking the terminal. People had begun gathering near the security checkpoints where biometric scanners now flashed red warning symbols across every lane. Uniformed officers moved rapidly between crowds while airport staff attempted to redirect confused travelers manually. Then came the moment that changed everything. The younger employee beside Lauren suddenly froze while staring down at his phone screen. "Oh my God," he whispered. Lauren turned sharply. "What now?" His face had gone pale. The Federal Aviation Administration just issued a nationwide alert. He swallowed hard before looking up slowly. Boston International has officially lost connection to the National Aviation Network. The room went dead silent. Even the businessman in the charcoal suit stopped speaking. Rainwater streaked slowly down the giant windows behind Evelyn Carter as she finally closed her laptop completely. Then, almost gently, she looked at Lauren Whitmore and said the words that made the blood drain from her face. "You are out of time." The atmosphere inside the executive lounge changed completely after those 4 words. "You are out of time." Nobody laughed anymore. The businessman in the charcoal suit slowly lowered his coffee cup onto the marble table without taking his eyes off Evelyn Carter. Near the reception desk, 2 airline employees whispered nervously while trying to reconnect frozen systems that no longer responded to anything they touched. Beyond the giant windows, the rain continued pouring across the dark runway while emergency vehicles with flashing amber lights moved between grounded aircraft like ghosts in the storm. Lauren Whitmore stared at Evelyn in complete disbelief. Every instinct told her this woman should not have been sitting quietly near the window wearing faded sneakers and a gray cardigan. But nothing about the situation made sense anymore. "Who exactly are you?" Lauren asked again, though this time the sharp confidence in her voice had weakened. Evelyn remained calm. "Someone who tried to warn them." "Warn who?" "The airport authority. The Federal Aviation Administration. Homeland Security." Several passengers exchanged uneasy looks. The younger employee beside Lauren swallowed hard. "This cannot be real," he whispered under his breath. Then suddenly the lounge doors burst open. 2 airport security officers entered, quickly followed by a man in his early 50s wearing a dark rain-soaked overcoat and an airport operations badge clipped to his belt. His face looked pale beneath the harsh emergency lighting. He scanned the room once with frantic eyes before locking onto Evelyn Carter near the window. And then he froze completely. The entire room noticed it instantly. "Dr. Carter," he breathed. Silence crashed across the lounge. Lauren turned slowly toward him. "You know her?" The man looked stunned that the question even needed asking. "Know her," he repeated. "She designed the adaptive synchronization architecture for this airport." The room went perfectly still. Even the distant terminal noise seemed to disappear for one suspended moment. Lauren blinked once, unable to process what she had just heard. The businessman in the charcoal suit stared openly now. One woman near the fireplace covered her mouth slightly in shock. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, almost tired, before standing calmly from her chair. She looked smaller standing than most people expected. Softer. Ordinary. Yet somehow the room itself seemed to shift around her now. The operations director hurried forward immediately. "Dr. Carter, we have been trying to contact you for nearly 45 minutes. Your flight status disappeared when the network crashed." Lauren's face lost color. "Wait," she interrupted carefully. "This woman built the airport system? Not just this airport, the operations director replied while staring anxiously at Evelyn. She built the synchronization backbone used across 3 major East Coast aviation hubs. A stunned hush spread through the lounge again. Lauren slowly looked back at Evelyn, remembering every dismissive glance, every cold word, every public humiliation she had inflicted less than 30 minutes earlier. The memory suddenly felt unbearable. Evelyn picked up her worn Navy tote bag quietly. "Did they isolate Terminal B?" she asked. The operations director hesitated. "No. Corporate wanted confirmation before authorizing a manual sever." Evelyn closed her eyes for one brief second. Then the recursive loop already spread into national traffic routing. The man's expression turned visibly alarmed. "Can you stop it?" Evelyn looked toward the dark departure boards outside the lounge windows. More emergency announcements echoed faintly through the terminal while stranded passengers crowded beneath powerless screens. "Maybe," she answered softly. The operations director immediately stepped aside for her, as though making room for someone far more important than himself. Security officers straightened instinctively. Staff members who had ignored her earlier now watched in complete silence. Lauren Whitmore stood motionless near the center of the lounge while the quiet woman she had treated like an inconvenience walked calmly past her toward the operations corridor. Then Evelyn paused beside her for just 1 second. Not angry, not cruel, just calm. "The dangerous thing about systems," she said quietly, "is that people forget human beings built them." Lauren could not even speak, and for the first time in years, the woman who controlled the executive lounge no longer looked powerful at all. The operations corridor beneath Boston International Airport looked nothing like the polished executive lounge above. The deeper Evelyn Carter walked into the secured operations level, the colder the air became. Fluorescent lights reflected against steel walls lined with emergency monitors and blinking red status indicators, while exhausted technicians rushed between terminals carrying tablets that no longer synced with anything. Every few seconds another warning alarm echoed somewhere deeper in the facility. The airport was unraveling in real time. Behind Evelyn, the operations director struggled to keep pace. "We isolated partial traffic from Terminal C," he explained breathlessly, but the synchronization loop already spread into regional routing servers. Evelyn nodded once without slowing down. Because the system was never designed to fail locally. They entered the main control room. The moment the doors opened, dozens of conversations stopped instantly. Rows of analysts sat frozen before dark monitors filled with corrupted flight data, flashing error codes, and collapsing route maps spreading across the East Coast aviation network. Some screens displayed aircraft identifiers stuck mid-transfer between systems. Others showed security authentication failures cascading through checkpoints nationwide. The room carried the heavy tension of highly trained people realizing they no longer understood the machine they depended on. Then someone noticed Evelyn standing near the doorway. A senior systems engineer nearly stood up from his station. "Dr. Carter?" he whispered in disbelief. More heads turned immediately. A hush spread across the room. Evelyn looked almost unchanged beneath the harsh white lighting. Gray cardigan, rain-specked sneakers, navy tote bag still resting over one shoulder. Yet suddenly every person in the room seemed to understand they were standing in the presence of the one individual who actually knew how the collapsing system worked. The operations director gestured quickly toward the central monitor wall. The recursive loop jumped beyond Boston 12 minutes ago. New York and Philadelphia are now experiencing synchronization failures too. Evelyn stared silently at the screen for several seconds. Flight paths flickered unnaturally across the digital map, while sections of the national aviation grid blinked unstable red one after another. "I warned them this would happen," she said quietly. Nobody spoke. A younger technician hesitated before asking carefully, "Warned who?" Evelyn slowly placed her laptop onto the central operations table and opened it for the first time since leaving the lounge. 3 years ago, she said softly, I presented a full vulnerability assessment to the Airport Authority and Federal Transportation Board. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard while encrypted system windows appeared across the screen. The synchronization architecture was designed for speed and automation, but executives kept demanding more integration between terminals, airlines, biometric security, and national routing systems. Another engineer looked confused. That sounds efficient. Evelyn glanced at him briefly. It is. Until one corrupted node starts feeding bad data back into the network faster than humans can manually stop it. Silence fell again. Heavy this time. One older systems analyst slowly removed his glasses. So this entire collapse, Evelyn finished the sentence calmly, was preventable. The room absorbed the words like a physical weight. Nearby, one executive lowered his head slightly in visible shame. Another quietly avoided eye contact altogether. Evelyn continued typing. I recommended manual segmentation protocols and emergency isolation triggers. Why were they never installed? Someone asked quietly from the back of the room. Evelyn paused for one brief second before answering. Because they slowed down profit optimization metrics by 0.8%. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly anymore. The room had gone completely still. Then a security officer hurried into operations carrying a printed update sheet. National Command just called, he announced nervously. Federal Aviation Traffic Control estimates complete East Coast grounding within the next 30 minutes if synchronization is not restored. Several technicians looked visibly shaken. One woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers. But Evelyn remained calm. Calm in a way that only comes from understanding something everyone else fears. She studied the collapsing system map for several long seconds before finally speaking again. There may still be a way to stop the spread, she said quietly. Every person in the room turned toward her instantly. But if I do this, Evelyn continued while looking at the dying network across the monitors. You are going to have to trust the woman your airport almost threw out less than an hour ago. No one questioned Evelyn Carter after that. Not the executives standing near the operations wall. Not the federal transportation officials crowding around dead terminals. Not even the senior engineers who had spent years believing they understood the system better than anyone alive. The room had already crossed beyond pride and titles. They were now operating inside pure survival. Evelyn stood quietly at the center workstation while dozens of failing system maps pulsed red across the giant monitor wall behind her. The glow reflected softly against her gray cardigan as her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard. Calm, precise, focused. Around her, alarms continued sounding through the facility in uneven waves while communication lines crackled non-stop with reports from grounded aircraft and frozen security checkpoints across the East Coast. National traffic routing degradation has reached 38%, one analyst announced nervously. Philadelphia just lost synchronization with biometric verification. Another technician looked up from his headset. LaGuardia is now experiencing baggage routing failure. The room grew heavier with every update, but Evelyn never rushed. That was the strange thing about real expertise. It did not panic loudly. It became quieter. She opened an encrypted interface hidden beneath layers of inactive architecture that most of the operations team had never even seen before. Several engineers exchanged confused glances immediately. What is that system? One asked. Evelyn did not look away from the screen. The original containment layer. The operations director frowned slightly. I thought corporate removed that years ago. They removed access to it. Evelyn corrected calmly. I never removed the system itself. Silence followed. Small. Respectful. One older engineer stared at her with visible disbelief. You left yourself a backdoor? Evelyn finally looked up. I left the airport in emergency brake. Somewhere in the room, someone quietly muttered, My God. Rain continued hammering the airport above them while emergency. Power lights flickered softly through the control center. Outside the secure glass walls, exhausted staff members rushed through hallways carrying printed manifests because digital systems no longer worked. Flights across multiple states remained grounded. Financial losses were already climbing into the millions by the minute. Yet inside the control room, every eye remained fixed on Evelyn Carter. She typed several commands rapidly, then stopped. I need all non-essential routing nodes disconnected manually. That will temporarily kill half the regional network, one executive warned immediately. Evelyn turned toward him with calm blue eyes. Half the network is better than the entire national aviation system collapsing. The man opened his mouth to argue further, then stopped. Even he knew she was right. Do it, the operations director ordered instantly. Technicians moved at once. For the first time all night, nobody hesitated around her instructions. Screens across the control room began shifting as manual overrides activated throughout multiple terminals. One by one, sections of the aviation grid disconnected from the spreading synchronization loop. Red warning indicators slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. A ripple of cautious hope moved through the room. Then suddenly, every monitor flashed violently at once. A sharp alarm screamed through the operations floor. One analyst nearly stood from his chair. "The corruption loop is accelerating again," he shouted. It jumped into the federal traffic mirror. Several people began speaking over each other in panic. "We are losing containment." The reroute failed. System response delay just doubled. The room threatened to descend back into chaos. But Evelyn raised one hand quietly, and somehow everyone stopped talking. Even the alarms suddenly seemed farther away. She stared at the central monitor for several long seconds, studying the corrupted synchronization flow moving through the network like poison through veins. Then something changed in her expression. Not fear, recognition. "They updated the predictive automation layer," she said softly. One engineer blinked in confusion. "What?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Slightly for the first time all night. Somebody modified my original architecture." The room fell completely silent. "Can you still stop it?" the operations director asked carefully. Evelyn looked toward the collapsing network map glowing across the wall of monitors. Red warning lights reflected across her face while the storm outside rattled faintly through the building structure above them. Then she answered in the same calm voice that somehow frightened people more than shouting ever could. "Only if I can find out who changed the system before it destroys itself completely." The control room felt smaller now. Hotter. Every monitor cast sharp red reflections across exhausted faces, while warning alarms pulsed through the facility like an unsteady heartbeat. Outside, the storm over Boston had intensified into sheets of cold rain hammering against the airport structure, but nobody inside operations noticed anymore. The only thing that mattered was the collapsing network spread across the wall of screens before them. Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still at the center console, studying lines of corrupted synchronization traffic racing through the aviation grid faster than human operators could react. Around her, engineers waited silently for instructions they hoped she still had. "Pull up the modification logs from the predictive automation layer," Evelyn said calmly. A technician immediately obeyed, fingers shaking slightly above the keyboard. Seconds later, encrypted authorization records appeared across the central monitor. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "There," she said quietly. "Freeze that sequence." The room zoomed in on a string of administrative updates buried deep within the architecture. At first glance it looked routine. Optimization patches, routing efficiency upgrades, latency reduction modifications. But the deeper Evelyn read, the colder her expression became. "Those changes bypassed my isolation protocols," she murmured. One federal analyst frowned. "Can you identify who approved them?" Evelyn stared at the authorization signature for several long seconds. Then the room watched something unexpected happen. The calm woman who had remained emotionally steady through the entire disaster suddenly looked disappointed. Not angry, not shocked, disappointed. "It was corporate," she said softly. The operations director blinked in confusion. "Corporate operations?" Evelyn nodded once. 2 years ago, they hired private optimization consultants to increase automated traffic efficiency between East Coast hubs. One older engineer looked stunned. "Those upgrades increased passenger throughput by almost 18%. "Yes," Evelyn replied quietly, "by removing the very safeguards designed to stop this exact kind of collapse." Silence spread across the room again. Heavy, embarrassed. Somewhere behind the monitors, a federal transportation executive slowly sat down without saying a word. Evelyn continued reading the hidden update chain. They disabled the manual segmentation delay because executives thought it slowed system responsiveness during peak travel seasons. 0.8%, one analyst whispered, remembering her earlier words. Evelyn nodded slightly. They traded resilience for speed. Nobody defended the decision now. Not after watching an entire aviation network begin collapsing in real time. A younger systems engineer looked pale. "Can the original protections still be restored?" Evelyn's fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard again. "Only partially. Will it be enough?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she opened another hidden layer beneath the corrupted automation core. Several technicians stared in disbelief as emergency containment systems they never knew existed appeared across the monitors. You buried fallback architecture inside inactive memory sectors, one engineer said quietly. Evelyn never looked up. I buried hope. The room fell silent again. Even the alarms seemed quieter now beneath the weight of what they were witnessing. Then suddenly a new alert exploded across the main screen. National routing failure imminent. Estimated containment window, 7 minutes. Several people began speaking at once. We are out of time. New York just reported complete synchronization instability. Federal Traffic Control is preparing nationwide grounding orders. Evelyn inhaled slowly. Once. Then her entire demeanor sharpened. Disconnect all predictive automation layers immediately. That will force the airports into manual routing, someone warned. Exactly. Her voice remained calm, but now it carried unmistakable authority. The system became dangerous the moment humans stopped controlling it. Technicians moved instantly. No hesitation. No questions. Across the monitor wall, massive sections of the aviation grid began severing themselves from automated synchronization pathways one by one. Red warning lights flickered violently as the corrupted loop fought against containment. For one terrifying moment, the entire system appeared ready to collapse completely. Then suddenly the central monitor stabilized. Small at first, barely noticeable. One section of the network returned from red to amber. Then another. A ripple of stunned realization spread through the room. The spread slowed. An analyst whispered. Nobody spoke louder than that. Nobody wanted to break whatever impossible thing was happening in front of them. Evelyn remained standing quietly at the center console, while stormlight flashed faintly through the reinforced operations windows behind her. The same woman the airport lounge staff had nearly removed less than 2 hours earlier was now holding together one of the largest aviation systems in the country with nothing but calm hands, quiet intelligence, and the safeguards nobody important had listened to when she first tried to warn them. For a long moment, nobody inside the operations center spoke at all. The giant monitor wall that had glowed blood red less than 10 minutes earlier now pulsed slowly between amber and green as isolated sections of the aviation network stabilized one after another. Across the East Coast, grounded airports began reconnecting manually through emergency routing channels Evelyn Carter had buried deep within the original architecture years before. The national grounding order was paused. Boarding systems slowly restarted. Security checkpoints regained partial verification access. It was not perfect. It was not elegant. But the collapse had stopped. A wave of exhausted relief spread quietly through the control room. One analyst removed her headset and wiped tears from her eyes without embarrassment. Another technician leaned back in his chair and stared upward at the ceiling as if he had just survived something much larger than a computer failure. Nearby, federal transportation officials lowered their voices for the first time all night. The panic was gone now. In its place stood something far rarer inside rooms filled with power. Humility. Evelyn remained standing at the center console while final containment scripts completed across her laptop screen. Her expression never changed much. No celebration. No arrogance. Just quiet concentration until the last unstable node finally turned green. Then she closed the laptop softly. The sound echoed more loudly than anyone expected. The room went silent again. One senior executive stepped forward carefully. Dr. Carter, he began, his voice carrying visible shame. On behalf of the entire aviation authority, I think I owe you an apology. Evelyn looked at him calmly. You owe one to the engineers who warned you before this happened. The man lowered his eyes immediately. Nobody argued with her anymore. Nobody even tried. The operations director approached next, exhausted lines visible beneath his eyes. Flights are beginning to recover across the regional network, he said quietly. You saved us. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her worn Navy tote bag over her shoulder. No, she replied softly. The emergency systems saved you. The ones nobody important wanted to pay attention to. Several people in the room looked visibly uncomfortable hearing that truth spoken aloud. Outside the reinforced operations windows, the storm over Boston had finally begun weakening. Rain still streaked down the glass, but the violent wind had faded into something softer now. The airport itself seemed to be breathing again. Then the control room doors opened quietly behind them. Lauren Whitmore stood there. She looked nothing like the polished executive lounge manager from earlier that evening. Her perfect posture was gone. Her carefully controlled confidence had disappeared completely. For the first time since anyone had met her, Lauren looked small, human. She hesitated before stepping into the room. Every person nearby recognized her immediately, though nobody spoke. Lauren's eyes found Evelyn standing near the monitor wall. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, almost struggling with the words, "I treated you unfairly tonight." Evelyn remained still. Lauren swallowed hard before continuing. "I judged you before I even saw you as a person." The silence inside the room became painfully heavy. Lauren's voice weakened slightly. "And I am deeply sorry." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Evelyn studied her for several long seconds. Then she finally walked closer. Not angry, not triumphant. Calm. Always calm. "The problem with places like airports," Evelyn said softly, "is that people start believing status matters more than humanity." Lauren lowered her eyes. Evelyn continued gently. "Systems are not destroyed by mistakes alone. They collapse when people stop listening to those they think are beneath them." The words landed harder than any insult ever could. Lauren nodded slowly, unable to speak. Around them, operations staff quietly returned to work while the restored aviation grid stabilized across the monitors overhead. Flights resumed one by one. Travelers throughout the airport began moving again. Life restarted. But inside that room, everyone understood something had changed permanently. Evelyn Carter picked up her old silver laptop and turned toward the exit. No applause followed her. No dramatic celebration. Just silence. Respectful silence. The kind that only appears when people finally understand they witnessed true dignity. And as the quiet woman in the gray cardigan disappeared down the operations corridor beneath the slowly recovering airport, the people she left behind would remember one lesson long after the system itself was repaired. The most dangerous thing in the world is underestimating someone simply because they chose not to announce their worth.